Hello, I'm Environmental. We are starting the IA. We're going to start with the two first sections, the environmental context and planning. For notes here, please write down the key things that you're seeing on the slide, examples, tips, and definitely circle or highlight the things you're worried about or have questions about, because that's the whole reason why we're doing this as notes. Let's jump in. The first thing you have to know is scoring on here is a little tough. These are very challenging. I keep that in mind. I have to use the IB rubric. So let's say you got a 3 out of 6 on the IB rubric, and that's you trying really hard. That's a 75% in our grade book, because IAs in IB Environmental are tied to grades. So let's now talk about the different parts of the IA, starting with the sections we're focusing on here at the beginning of the year. Let's be superheroes. Let's go. So before jumping into the IA, we need to start thinking about what variables we're going to manipulate for our field work, because we need to generate our research question. That's the first thing. So before we even do a research question, we have to really know what we can manipulate. And we've limited ourselves to four major topics. Think about the summer assignment, and within those 4 major topics, what could I manipulate or change about those topics? You're going to be giving a brainstorming document that might have some examples of types of variables you can change. You can go beyond that, but those are just some starter ideas. Remember that in this course you have to have 5 different variations or levels of IV. That could be 5 different transects I'm doing measurements on, 5 slight differences in places I'm putting quadrats, etc. Those are things that I can manipulate or change in fieldwork. DV, so what am I going to collect as data or measure? That's going to be very much related to the tools I have available, what probes we have available, what we can do with figuring out biodiversity if we're collecting plant data, etc. So a lot of that's about tools that are available, and I've listed some of that on our brainstorming document. But keep in mind our timing. We're trying to generate our research questions over the next week or two, and make sure you're looking at Google Classroom or in class for the deadlines. And we also, within a couple of weeks, will have to have these first starter sections fully completed and submitted with our full plan. That way, by a month and a half into school, we're starting our actual field work. And that's probably by another field trip date. Okay, so when we think about the first actual section we're going to be submitting formally, the real thing I'm going to be checking first is your research questions through that brainstorm document. So you've now thought about some potential IVs and DVs. Well, that becomes a specific research question that's focused. So a research question is based on some environmental issue you've picked. Remember, we have 4. Then you pick some research questions about it. You're going to give us some background. Well, where and why are you doing this experiment? Is it looking at specific species at specific locations, a specific time of year? Give us some little bit of background about where, when, how within that question. So to determine how the IV affects the DV in the context of your experiment. Maybe it's a quadrat experiment, a transect experiment. After the research question is really thought of and you've gotten that kind of approved with me, you will start developing a hypothesis, but to really be able to do a hypothesis, it's an educated answer. So we're going to be doing kind of a lot to make your hypothesis, and that's going to be related to those background research note cards. And you're going to be required to do some background research note cards on your environmental issue, whether it's runoff or macro invertebrate biodiversity, whatever it is. You're going to need at least 3 background research note cards to show that you have some background on that. And not only that, you're going to have to do some background research on the technique being used, whether it's using nets or transects or quadrats. I know we've been learning a lot about that type of thing in class or through a field trip or other things, but you need some concrete literature research that shows that you are going to be able to make an educated hypothesis, which is the next step. So soon, in about a week or 2, those background research note cards will get checked, and you guys will have the really good stuff ready to make a really educated hypothesis. And so after that brainstorm is given credit, and I've checked your research questions and we picked the best one, you will move on to making your formal hypothesis and providing some rationale for it. All right, keep in mind our hypothesis does have a lot of kind of bit of a background to it. After you have that basic hypothesis with some background and you've done a lot of other background research, you're going to be ready to really flesh out the rest of the environmental context section that will be assigned probably within the second month of school. All right, and be due before we do any sort of second field trip or start our field work. So this section really is like one or so paragraphs, and within it you're discussing that issue, whether it's runoff or invasive species. Consider the types of things we were learning in our summer assignment. What is the societal problem? Is it related to money? Are there any stats or quotes that we can do from recent articles that say what's happening? If it's about a toxic level of something, what is the EPA or the local government say about that? Any case studies related to that we can find or talk about in class are all good to include. So yes, this is going to be about a paragraph. All right, and we need to make sure we link it back to our research question. And so usually this first thing is about a paragraph, and then we have a shorter second paragraph that says, okay, not only this big idea problem of runoff and erosion, but specifically I'm measuring blank and changing blank because. And that usually ends up being 2 different paragraphs. All right, not huge, but definitely 2 different paragraphs that our background research helped us do. All right, and within those, hopefully you start to describe how you'll answer your research question, but that is really going to happen when you start doing your methods. All right, so then we start having the next section called the planning. And the planning is going to be involved with telling us really now what is my specific IV and DV. For those, I need to really provide some information about how and where and when I'm doing transects, quadrats, what those units are, what tools I'm using, what range I think I might have on different tools. And that stuff can be pretty hard, which is why we do a lot of this in class with the basic and drafting those written sections and even having some time to peer edit. All right, so when we do this, we really can do it in a table format, but it should be detailed. So this version is a lot better. Even that's not that detailed. It could be better than that. All right, here's even better. This person was varying the type of soil. Some people could do it in grams. This person did it in percents. But in general, keep in mind that we are doing field work, not secondary data actually anymore. And so you need to have 5 different levels of your IV. If you're doing something that looks kind of different than that, you should have gotten approved by your teacher. All right, the next thing that would be involved after really fleshing out the IV and DV formally in your planning section would be to really think about, do I have a control group? Do I have something that can act like a baseline or comparison? Now, since we're really doing field work now, it's really hard. You could compare to some sort of uncontaminated version of doing something in a lab, maybe an online known amount of something, like a biodiversity in a really healthy area that you find online, that the government has done that check, or maybe I have an unaffected location within my different levels of my IV that I'm using as a comparison. You should maybe, if you're stuck on this, talk to me in class because I'd like to help you with it. But either way, you should justify why your comparison group is used for comparison, even if it's something that you don't yourself collect as data and you find online. All right, so this is an example. It doesn't have to be super long-winded. All right, so next we will really flesh out our constants. And this is really important because fieldwork is really hard to keep constant. We call them in IB controlling variables. I list out all the things I'm keeping the same in my experiment as best as I can. If I didn't keep them the same, what they would do to my results, and then how I'm going to keep them the same. Notice this person is very, very specific. If there's things, especially in fieldwork, you can't control, specifically like if it rains, that you're doing it over the course of a whole day or multiple days because you can't fit it in timing-wise, you have to really explain those uncontrollable variables and explain what they might do. But we definitely want to control as much as we can, or keep them as constant as much as you can. The next section we'll have is justifying our sampling method. This is like, why are you using quadrats or transects? Why are you using the type you're using? Why not a belt transect? Why'd you pick this probe and not a pH strip? A lot of this is going to have to do with time, money, and accuracy, but you have to justify it. Sometimes it's even safety and efficiency. If you're using an online data source for anything, why did you pick that online data source? For instance, if it's your control group. Why is it best to use any like other things that you're using to compare? Most of us aren't going to be touching survey data. If anything, it's mostly going to be these top two. If you're using some sort of biodiversity indicator, you need to explain how and why you're using it. Alright, so in general, that's something I and others will check for, a real justification, and it needs to be a little long-winded. Alright, so for instance, if you picked this area, why are you picking this area, and why are you picking those transects? Why aren't they further away from each other, for instance? Why isn't it going the opposite direction, and so forth? You want to give as much information as possible, and you maybe even do so via pictures, and that's called a protocol diagram. Alright, lots of different ways you could justify why you're doing what you're doing. Alright, here's one time that teacher gave back feedback on why they might have done this. And notice that this person was nervous. Why are you only doing stuff in this area and not comparing it with another area? We also have to keep in mind safety. Safety could be safety for you, safety for the local organisms, safety for any tools, safety when you're working with water and soil and anything else. But you do have to have a risk assessment section, and it needs to be thorough. It's usually about a small paragraph. Here's some examples. Lastly, a couple of things left. We have materials lists. They should be detailed. They should have units, okay? Amounts, sizes. This is kind of hard at the beginning. You're going to make your best guess as you are starting your field work. You are going to adjust this after you do your actual field work, because you might find that you had to change something. And that happens at times, right? So, I originally wanted to do regular quadrats, and now I did a gridded quadrat, so I needed this tool. And then you'd go back and explain why you had to do a gridded quadrat. Okay, so much more detailed. I need amounts, types, be specific. Be specific. Okay, next we have to have our step-by-step instructions, like a recipe, types of equipment, if I had to calibrate anything, if I had to set up a transect, how and why I did that, where did I do that, why did I do it there. If I'm going to do any sort of data stuff, I'm going to add that in. That's something that you might add in later after we start talking about what we're going to do data-wise. It's highly recommended that you use Paint or PowerPoint or Google Draw or even Google Maps to try to get some sort of visual, because visuals help us picture things, especially in fieldwork. I don't know where you did your transects or quadrats, especially if you use random sampling, stratified sampling. I need to see like why and how and where those ended up being. Okay, so that's not the best way of doing it. I like it to be in bullets. This is a much better way. That's the good one. Alright, a visual is pretty cool. This one's kind of mediocre. Could be a diagram like that. That's kind of nice. Alright, so overall, it's kind of tough stuff, but that's why we're working together on it, and we're going to do it in pieces. Alright, good job, guys. I'm so proud of you.